Welcome to ACWR's fifth program, Collaborative Women Religious Archives Initiatives. What are the options? In our 2022 Leadership-Centered webinar series. My name is Casey Bowser, and I am the outgoing president of ACWR. Archivists for Congregations of Women Religious assist lay and religious archivists in the management, interpretation, and preservation of the historical record of Catholic sisters and nuns in the United States and worldwide. Established in 1990, we are a nonprofit professional organization that serves a diverse membership of archivists, scholars, leaders, and allied professionals. I am pleased you're with us today to address the future of women religious archives. We've promised to engage all the stakeholders as we face future planning and decision-making for these valuable collections. As you may know, the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate recently circulated a survey to leaders and archivists about the current standing of their archival collections. A special report will be released in January from Clara with an overview of the results of this survey. ACWR will host a separate webinar to review and discuss the Clara survey. However, we wanted to highlight some of the findings before our panel today to better inform you about the risks to these rich legacies. So wait one moment while I share my screen. Okay, hope everybody can see this. So first we want to show the survey was, of course, a collaborative effort. We have a list of the collaborators here, some of whom are represented today and our presenters. And so this survey, these archive surveys that were sent overwhelmingly revealed that religious leaders and archivists both are passionate about preserving the legacy of the institutions they represent. But there are some astounding realities we need to face, and soon. It may come as no surprise that 70% of survey respondents have fewer than 100 members remaining in their community. And at that, the average age skews over 80. But in spite of this striking statistic, nearly 60% of communities do not have a plan to downsize, merge, or transition their archival collection. And more than 80 communities have less than a 10-year timeline. So here we have some statistics that show the age that I just mentioned. This should not be a surprise to most of you. And here, there are not many communities with a plan for their archives. But interestingly, one of the statistics here that I wanted to show is in the time frame. 41% of survey respondents, which represent 87 communities, couldn't even envision a timeline and didn't respond to the question. So it's safe to say that dozens and dozens of congregations will need to transition their archive in the next decade. So as you can see, 5 to 10 years, 3 to 5 years within the year, that represents more than 80 communities, but 87 communities don't even know what their timeline is. So we interpret that from the ACWR perspective to say it's very likely many more. Please bear in mind too that the survey is just a snapshot, a representation of the whole. So the real numbers are likely much more staggering. A few other quick highlights from the survey, some other data points from the survey. First, this chart of preferred future repositories, which represent some of the options available to religious communities. Not all the options, but some of the options. And as you can see, based on the interest, very interested and somewhat interested, charism-based archives, regional collaboratives, and academic archives are the top 3 choices among leadership. And of course, we'll hear more about some of those today, but you can see charism-based, very interested, regional collaboratives between very interested, somewhat interested, academic archives slightly less so, but still some interest there, diocesan archives, and then local archive options like museums, historical societies, nonprofits did not seem particularly appealing to leadership. The special report will detail more specifics, so that will come out in January, and the survey collaborators would be happy to share the full report with you if you'd like more information sooner. But as an archivist, I also wanted to highlight this last piece. And hopefully you can see most of this. You might have to move some of your screen around, but women religious archives rely quite heavily on unpaid volunteers and part-time staff. So as you can see, this talks about, do you have archival staff? 60% do, 34% don't. How many have professionally trained lay staff? How many have professionally trained sister staff? Many of them do. Most of them are working less than full-time. There are many, many who are relying on sister archivists, sister volunteers, lay volunteers for a lot of the work being done in the archives right now. Only 32% of surveyed communities have professionally trained lay archivists, and even fewer professionally trained sister archivists. But the sheer amount of work necessary to prepare an archive for transition requires, at bare minimum, professional consultation and hopefully full-time staff, at least one full-time person, we would hope. And while much of this seems overwhelming, and it can be, we know that there are paths forward. I consider this point the beginning of a new era of collaboration, sharing, innovation, legacy bearing, and more. And your presence here today on this webinar, whether you're live or watching later, shows that you too are invested in steering your own path forward. I commend you and thank you for joining us. And I will now gladly turn the spotlight to Lisa Schell, the ACWR President-elect, to formally introduce our speakers and facilitate our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Casey, and welcome everyone. We are delighted to have all of you here. We have a great turnout, and we have some great speakers with us today who are committed to featuring a lot of the issues that Casey addressed in the survey results. And we would love to continue that conversation with all of you in the upcoming year and years to come. So our first speaker really needs no introduction, but I will say a few words about each speaker just before they speak. This is a lengthy webinar. It's 2 hours. Please stay on if you can. It is being recorded and you can go back and watch it later. Please make sure you're muted and use your hand raise at the end. We'll have a Q&A at the very end, or if you don't want to lose out on your question, you can drop it in chat. Hopefully we're going to be able to use the chat. So I believe if you could check that, Mary Grace had an issue with, if you could just double check that, that would be great. And we'll have the Q&A at the very end. Michael Burns was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he was educated in both elementary and secondary schools by the Dominican Sisters of Grand Rapids. He earned the traditional Jesuit baccalaureate degree in history, literature, and philosophy at Marquette, where he had the opportunity to study with the late Dean of American Catholic History, Thomas O'Brien Haley, S.J. He was in the United States Marine Corps during the Vietnam War and worked on Wall Street for 5 years. After which he joined the administration at Princeton University, and he has a graduate degree also in history from Harvard and has continued work in higher education ever since. He joined the staff of the John J. Burns Library of Boston College in 2010 and began working with the Boston College Catholic Archives Project when it began in 2017. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michael Burns.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me here. It is a beautiful day in New England, and I hope it's the same where all of you are. I have to point out that the father of the Boston College Catholic Archives Repository, Malachi Richard McCarthy, is with us today. The whole thing here at Boston College, anyway, is Malachi's creation. He suggested it in early January of 2017. I brought it to the attention of the president of Boston College, Father William Leahy, who is a Stanford historian, and he said, we absolutely are very interested. Malachi came here. He brought Ellen Dalton Pierce here. We had meetings, and within 6 months, we were well underway, although COVID did get in our way, as I know it did for everyone. So far, we've spent over $1 million in renovating space in the Boston College Theology and Ministry Library building. And we have signed 9 congregations, 8 of women and 1 of men, and they have all deposited already or shipments are on the way. 1 congregation of men and 3 congregations of women have gift agreements and said they will be signing after, of course, they speak with their lawyers and the like. And 8 congregations of women have gift agreements and are discussing it with us. Boston College purchased a small college named Pine Manor, which is about 1.5 miles from the main campus of BC. It unfortunately went out of business due to COVID, financial reasons, lack of endowment. And the last class graduated this past June. That library building is now available to us as a campus storage space until Boston College builds a Catholic archives building. Shepley Bullfinch, the local architecture firm, are in the process of submitting architectural plans. I think the first set of plans have been brought to the university for the consideration of the people at the top. And I'm told by people in BC Advancement that they are hopeful that this building will not cost more than $55 or $60 million. It will be a substantial building, planning for the future, because probably 20 other religious congregations of men and women have contacted us in some way, however tangential. What are we doing? What are we planning? Maybe we want to deposit at Boston College. Maybe we want to deposit somewhere else. Maybe we're not going to come to fulfillment, etc. But in any event, we're planning for the future. I believe that next week, there will be proposals for applicants going out to the National Archive journals, and we're going to hire 2 processors immediately, if not sooner. We have a lot of collections on hand that have to be processed. So I would say that we're well along. We're very grateful to Malachi for bringing this to our attention, to Ellen Dalton Pierce for encouraging us. And as I've gotten around the country talking to people, everyone seems happy what's going on here at Cleveland, at Hark, at Santa Clara. So we know it's very, very important. And I'd say that covers what I need to say primarily.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We're going to move on now to Nadia Nasser, who is the head of archives and special collections in the University Library at Santa Clara University. Since 2002, Nadia has been working with archival, special, and digital collections in public and academic libraries. In June 2015, Nadia began work as the head of the archives and special collections at Santa Clara University, where she has administrative oversight over the university's historical records and special collections, including a newly established collecting focus on women in theology and the Catholic Church, with special emphasis on women religious. So Nadia, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Lisa, for the introduction. I'm really honored to be here with my collaborative archives panelists at the session today, and I look forward to hopefully a lively question and answer at the end. As Lisa said, my name is Nadia Nasser, and I'm the head of archives and special collections at the Santa Clara University Library in Santa Clara, California. Hang on, there we go. Okay. As I've given variations of this presentation in recent years, I've come to realize our more recent collaborations preserving congregation archives are really the latest in a series of collaborations, which date back to the Jesuits' founding of Santa Clara College in 1851. Father Nobili, an Italian Jesuit, inherited the Mission Santa Clara manuscript and library collection from the last Franciscan to administer sacraments at Mission Santa Clara. And we continue to preserve and administer the Jesuit-generated university records that date from the early years of the college to the present. And these institutional records are complemented by the personal papers of Jesuits, lay, faculty, and staff and alumni from throughout the school's history. And the Mission Santa Clara library books form the core beginnings of the college library. And then since 2015, we've been working to balance our Jesuit male-centric collections to reflect the contributions of women in theology in the church, and with a special emphasis on women religious. Our second collaborative foray, contributing to the care of Catholic religious records, began more recently in 2010 when the California Jesuit province, our founding religious order, relocated its archives from its Los Gatos novitiate to the newly constructed library and learning commons, where archives and special collections are presently housed. The province at the time covered the costs to transport the collections to SCU and supplied insurance coverage, as well as a province-designated archivist. And then after that, cost sharing included a one-time fee to purchase a computer that SCU replaced every 4 years, as well as a $5,000 annual fee, which increased at the rate of 3% per annum. In turn, SCU supplied state-of-the-art archival storage facilities and shared use of its Norman F. Martin SJ reading room and the office space and equipment, as well as networking and cataloging platforms and other support to the province archivist. As many of you know, this arrangement ended in 2018 when the California Province Archives were relocated to their central repository, the Jesuit Archives and Research Center in St. Louis, Missouri. In terms of our facilities, archives and special collections at SCU is housed in the library and learning commons. Our facilities include our 500 square foot Norman F. Martin SJ reading room, our 1,100 square foot exhibition gallery and classroom, 2,100 square foot staff and processing suites, a dedicated 3,200 square foot temperature and humidity controlled vault, and we have additional high density storage in our automated storage and retrieval system. The automated storage and retrieval system is a space that we share with the rest of the library, but the materials that we do have stored there are stored in restricted bins that only we have access to, so we're able to maintain pretty standard security of those materials, even though they're in a shared space. Our staffing is composed of 6 full-time positions. Right now we have 3 vacancies, so I am keenly feeling all of you who are lone arrangers wearing many, many hats. But as I said, 6 full-time positions, including myself. We also have a full-time cataloging specialist who reports to the head of a different department, but 50% of her time is devoted to cataloging archives and special collections materials. And in particular, they have specialized training for rare books, doing enhanced descriptive records for rare book collections, and then as a really wonderful consultant when we're talking about how to format catalog records for our archival materials. And then additionally, we employ anywhere from 6 to 7 student employees, depending on the funds that we have available, and they average about 10 to 12 hours per week. Speaking of funds, we receive an annual allocation from the university for salaries and benefits. operating expenses, and then also a very small portion of the library's acquisitions funds. Although our allocations have ranged just below six figures, this constitutes less than 2% of the library's 4.1 million collections budget. And most of that, as some of you may know, goes to the very expensive database subscriptions. We also have some unrestricted gift funds that we use for special projects, and that includes offsetting part of the costs of work done to transfer the Sisters of the Holy Family archives, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a couple of minutes. Our current allocation for salaries and benefits amounts to just over $600,000. Our average operating budget for the last 5 years has been around $90,000. Although it took a pretty significant hit during the recent pandemic years, we still had enough to cover our mission critical operating expenses during the pandemic time. We use sparingly our unrestricted gift funds for special projects such as mass digitization projects or the aforementioned Sisters of the Holy Family Archives transfer. And I want to add a little side note that when we began approaching women religious congregations about the possibility of transferring their archives, we did so assuming that we would generally cover the costs of the transfer and rehousing, et cetera, using our own funds, and have not made it a stipulation that any conversation, or we've not made it a stipulation in any of our conversations that religious congregations should provide funds for these projects. But with that said, the Sisters of the Holy Family were in a position to offer money not only for the long-term care of their own collections, but also to support SCU collaborations with other religious congregations. And I'll talk a little bit more about those details on my next slide. So although we are a well-established and decently funded archival unit, taking on the SHF archives and other women religious collections is no small feat, as I'm sure many of you know, and it requires long-term funding to support those activities. As the Sisters of the Holy Family congregation is preparing for closure, they look not only to preserve their past, but also to live their mission into the future. An expendable fund of $100,000 from the congregation offset the costs that we shared with them for the initial transfer and enhanced description of the SHF archives. And that project cost approximately around $200,000 and achieved in 6 months what would have taken us probably 2 to 3 years at our current staffing levels. SHF also established 2 endowed funds that generate revenue for both the long-term care of their collections and anticipated future transfers. And then a second endowed fund will enhance SCU's archival programming centered on women religious congregations in the West. And we anticipate being able to raise funds also to build this endowment to support a variety of initiatives, including perhaps offsetting costs of other, well, definitely offsetting costs of other archival donations, but also maybe to fund digitization of collections, supplying small grants for supplies, or, hopefully one day being able to hire a dedicated full-time staff position to support preservation and use of these collections here at Santa Clara. And although we miss the collections and the expertise of Brother Dan, the California Jesuit province archivist, the relocation of their archives made room for our expanding collection centered on women religious. We debuted our flagship collection, the Professional Papers of Sandra Schneider's IHM, with a spring exhibition that featured at the opening reception of the 2016 Conference on the History of Women Religious. In 2019, we executed a gift agreement that designates SCU as the future home of the Archives of the Sky Arch Hermitage, which is the St. Albans or main home of a canonical hermitess since 1994. That same year, we completed the project to transfer the Fremont, California-based Sisters of the Holy Family Archives to SCU, as that congregation is actively preparing for completion. And then currently we have 4 verbal commitments from women religious congregations located in the Pacific Northwest, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and the New England area respectively. And then we have an executed deed of gift with the North American Conference of Associates in Religious, also known as NACAR. When it comes to final disposition of a congregation's archives, there are opportunities and challenges unique to a university archives collaboration to consider. On the one hand, donating to a university archives affords the opportunity to leverage existing programs and facilities by partnering with an institution that already has an active archival program. As part of an academic library or university archives can offer shared cataloging platforms and potentially keep collections in their geographic context. And as part of our educational mission, we will work with faculty to ensure materials are used in teaching and research. Now, among the challenges that come with transfer of one's archives are loss of immediate access to physical collections, which generates perhaps a longer turnaround time for research queries. Because we aim for broad access, there's some loss of control over who has access to your congregation's records, though it's worth noting that access is mediated to a certain extent by means of researcher registration and consultation with archive staff. And we also have policies and practices in place for restricting access to materials that should be confidential. And some of the most common things are any content that has personally identifiable information. So for example, sometimes there are social security numbers, or the other most common restricted material are transcripts and grade records for an individual. And then further, university archive staff who are unfamiliar with the history and charism of individual religious orders do face a significant learning curve to build collections knowledge and capacity. And then finally, depending on how well organized collections are or how they've been stored, there may be some considerable costs to rehouse collections, and then also to create or enhance existing collection description. Through collaborative efforts over the last 7 years, Archives and Special Collections has cultivated a core group of collections which altogether reflect the many facets of women's spirituality and contributions to the church in the Bay Area and beyond. In the coming years, we hope to continue to expand our holdings or collaborative efforts in support of women religious archives. And as I mentioned, we're also interested in exploring the potential to offer small grants, consulting services, or online hosting of digital collections or archival finding aids. And then as other regional religious archive centers continue to grow or emerge, we are also looking forward to opportunities to connect and contribute to national strategies that preserve and make accessible religious archives for research and use. So for Archives and Special Collections at Santa Clara University, that's it in a nutshell. At the end of the panel portion, I'm happy to answer questions that come up, but also I hope that you feel free to reach out to me via email or phone. I'd be happy to chat, at a later date. And thank you all so much.
Thank you, Nadia. Our next speaker is Sister Susan Durkin, the Executive Director of Women Religious Archives Collaborative, founded in July of 2022. Sister Susan Durkin has been an Ursuline Sister of Cleveland for over 30 years. Sister Susan holds a BA in Psychology and Elementary Education from Ursuline College, an MA in Pastoral Ministry from Mount St. Joseph University, and a certificate in nonprofit management from Case Western Reserve University. Sister Susan's ministries include elementary education, HIV/AIDS social service work, congregational advancement, and as her congregation's president. Currently, Sister Susan is serving as executive director of the newly formed Women Religious Archives Collaborative and is a consultant for religious congregations in the United States. She serves on several boards locally and nationally. Sister Susan has a passion for the future of religious life and for keeping the legacy of women religious, especially their mission and service, alive for future generations. Okay, Sister Susan.
Okay, sorry about that. I am out of my element here. I am at a retreat center helping a community right now, so I appreciate your patience with me. So it's great to be here with you today, and I'm very happy to represent the Women Religious Archive Collaborative. Like everybody that's here from the collaborative group, it really was a springboard from Malachi's idea that germinated in 2018 at Boston College. And so in my own experience, in my own community with our archives, it really led me to realize that this was a larger problem than just, our community and what might we do to help that. So the last time that I had given this presentation, we had just newly formed and the idea was percolating out there, and we were basically just trying to see who might have an interest in this project. So if we fast forward to today in 2022, we have actually created our board. We've approved our governing documents. We are participants in this national conversation. We've completed a feasibility study about having a capital campaign to support this effort financially. We now have inclusion in the official Catholic directory. Our congregations have signed memorandums of understanding, and we have grant submissions underway, as well as our site selection is underway. So in our initial phase, we realized that we wanted to develop some flexibility. We wanted to create our own corporation, and we were looking for flexibility, Catholic identity, and interdependence. Because it's our hope that at some point in time, that perhaps in this national conversation, this may become a larger organization in some fashion in the eyes of the church. So we wanted to be nimble enough to be able to make that move. So we had our first board meeting on July 8th, and we have a collaborative board. We have Sister Jean Ann Zappa, who is the current president of the Louisville Ursulines, Sister Margot Young, who is a precious blood sister from Dayton, Ohio, Sister Judith Ann Karam, who is a Sister of Charity of St. Augustine, and then Sister Joanne Gross, who is a civil attorney and is acting as our secretary, and myself, who has now been appointed as the executive director. So we're official. As I said, we are now officially incorporated in the state of Ohio. We have our articles of incorporation, we have our code of regulations, and we have been included in the official Catholic directory. We also have our committee structure, and we have active committees working right now. We have our small board of directors, which I know is going to grow as we do. We have a committee of archivists. Our archivists, each one of the congregations that are participating in our project right now are a part of that committee structure, and they are being overseen by Ellen Pierce. Ellen is acting as our archival consultant at this point in time. We are looking to meet with the archivist every month. We've already had an initial assessment of collections. We know linear feet, and we know basically what are in most of the collections. So we'll be meeting with the archivist monthly to develop our plans, to answer any suggestions, any concerns, to talk about what expertise and experience they bring to the project and what their suggestions might be as we shape what this the building space is going to look like and what our needs will be. So the archivists are very critical to us in this whole process. We also have a council of partners. We found it was important to have a leadership liaison from each one of the participating congregations at this point, so that we can continue to give updated information back and forth to the congregations. And then if they so wish, they can share that with their communities. We have a finance committee. We're creating budgets. We're looking at projections for the future, what our operating expenses would be. You know, we're still in this pre-construction phase, so pre-construction, construction, et cetera. And we're looking to include more of the congregational CFOs and others with that area of expertise to help us in this. We have a planning team, which includes me. We have a project manager, and we have a representative from the Sisters of Charity Foundation that sits on this with us. The Sisters of Charity Foundation here in Cleveland has been very supportive of this effort. They have been funding to this point and have been very active in wanting to see that this project has life and a future. We also have an architect and the construction team. We have not begun our programming arm yet, although we have tapped into the preservation programs at Kent State University and at Ursuline College to see how we can create some sort of agreements there, and we can get that kind of expertise and look at the kind of programming that we'd like to do in the future and envision in our space. We also have a communications arm where we have a network of congregational communicators so that we're saying one message. They're helping us right now to develop our communication strategy, because one of the things that we learned in our feasibility study was that the general public does not realize that this is an issue for congregations. And so how do we make this known and balance this with all of the other priorities and congregational needs so that these important histories and legacies are protected in the future? So the concept for our space, as I said, each congregation has submitted their linear footage of their current archives. Then we will begin with a programming exercise so that we can determine the space needs as well as expansion room. As I said, to date, we have 12 congregations that have signed their memorandums of understanding, but we're in conversation with more. So before we build the space, if we know that there are others that want to come, we can make room for that now, but we are also going to make room for expansion as we know that collections will grow through the years. We want space for staff, possibly 3 to 4 with an ED, a lead archivist, processors, et cetera, and so forth, several volunteers, spaces for student interns, a research room, obviously the stack room, which would be climate controlled, and our collections will be maintained separately. We found in conversation with some of the congregations, they thought that all their collections would be mixed in together. And so we needed to make sure that they understood that this would not be commingled yet in the same space. We want an area to digitize, display and exhibit space, and then a lecture and programming area, because it's very important to us that this be an active center where people can come and learn more about us and participate in some programs, as well as the researchers that would come and use the space. As I said, we did a feasibility study. This is the cover from our case for support. We went out, as I said, the Sisters of Charity Foundation in Cleveland supported our work, the feasibility study, and some salary dollars to date. Graciously, we've been getting some expertise from ARCC and ACWR as collaborative partners. LCWR and CMSWR have been active with all of the hubs as well, and wanting to make sure that congregations know that we exist and we are here as a resource. We're in the process of seeking grant support, which will include, monies for professional and technical assistance and to help us with architectural and construction fees, because we need to bring this project through the actual building phase. A capital campaign for us is going to cover the cost of the construction, furniture, and equipment, and we're hoping some endowment. So as I said, we just completed the feasibility study. We have the results of that. We're going to be sharing that with our stakeholders, and we look to push this out to the congregational leaders to say what the results were, and that we will be kicking off a capital campaign in the near future. And to date, participating congregations have pledged over $4 million. One of the things, as those of you may or may not know that are in the advancement world, to have your family or your stakeholders say that they want to put something in is always attractive to those that you want to ask for financial support from. And so we had no set amount for the congregations. What we said was, whatever gift you can make would be important to us at this point, depending on your circumstances. And so congregations were very generous. We've also asked them to consider this in their legacy planning, so that when the congregation possibly comes to fulfillment, that the center that is holding their precious collections would be supported in some way with a legacy gift from their congregation. So right now with our expenses, we're projecting our pre-construction budget at $1.5 million. Our construction budget is a TBD because we're still trying to figure out how large the bread box is. So we don't have an actual figure for that. And we're assuming at this point in time with some of our projections, our operating costs could be up to $500,000 a year. So obviously the endowment is going to be very important for us. As you know, the scholarly research component is really important. And it's really critical, I think, that congregations understand that having some sort of protection around the collection is very important for them. So who gets to see the collection? How do we vet those people coming in? What gets to be seen? The congregation in their gifting and in their legal agreements clearly will be able to spell out how they want their collection utilized and at what time they want that to happen. So our next steps are continuing to identify and invite participating congregations. I'm still getting requests and just curiosity questions from people. We've completed signing the memorandums of understanding for those that are interested at this point, and that just gives us some sense of who at this point in time. It's obviously not a binding legal agreement. We are working on our binding legal agreements now, And we're also working on our policies and procedures for the space. We're going to be doing that due diligence with our archival group. And we're also choosing our final location. So we've been out looking at various locations that either congregations are putting forward or that we are working with a developer to see what space might fit into our criteria that we're looking for. We've initiated our communications plan, and we have initiated our design phase. We're working with a group out of Boston called Mass Design right now that is helping us to look at what the possibilities are of some of the spaces that we're looking at. As I said, we're going to be initiating a capital campaign after the first of the year. And in the meantime, we're continuing to assess collections, support our archivists, and we're preparing individual plans and timelines with them. And of course, as always, money being the bottom line in a lot of this, the budget projections and the timelines are really important. So we're continuing to run multiple trains on multiple tracks, but the project is gaining a lot of traction and a lot of interest at this point. So I just want to thank you on behalf of all the congregations who are currently involved and for those to come. We're hoping that we can grow our space because we feel that it's important to have that kind of cross-pollination between the charisms. I think that's particularly interesting for a researcher, and either within a region or outside of a region, and to be able to connect our network virtually with charism families, with the hub repositories, with other educational institutions, I think is really exciting for us. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sister Susan Durkin. And now we're going to move on to Sister Ginger Downey, who is a member of the Congregation of Our Lady of Victory Missionary Sisters, commonly known as Victory Knoll Sisters. She has just finished 10 years in congregational leadership and currently serves as president of the board of directors for the Heritage and Research Center at St. Mary's, or HARC. She holds a master's in liturgy from St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, and has served in parishes and the Diocesan Office of Liturgy and Worship. HARC is a collaboration of 9 congregations of women religious from 5 states: Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Missouri, and Iowa. HARC is currently in the design phase of the center, which will include an archival vault for the collections from each congregation, along with a permanent historical display for each congregation, and a revolving thematic exhibit that will highlight each congregation's contribution. So I'm going to turn it over to Sister Ginger.
Good afternoon, and thank you. It's a delight to be with you all. As we start this project, I get so excited about talking about archives. In my 10 years with leadership, I was the liaison, so I have worked with archives and our archivist. So the Heritage and Research Center at St. Mary's, or HARC, is currently 9 congregations who are working together through a board of directors to create an archival vault that will house and preserve the archive of each congregation. Once the archive of each congregation has been received, processed, and integrated into the vault, then the process to create an exhibit space will be developed. The majority of the 9 congregations are relatively small and somewhat nearing completion. I would say that they have made some of the difficult decisions and realized that they need to work together to provide for the continual care of their mission, values, and charism through the care of their archive. It is the tangible artifacts and documentation of their existence and their place within the larger story of Catholicism. So as Susan just said, you know, we have a board, we are a 501c3, we are in the Catholic directory, so we're official. And we too try to work with all the congregations to make sure that they are updated. Currently, we are in the process of actually designing the master plan for HARC, with the emphasis at this time to design the actual vault that will house the archive collection. The building will be constructed in such a way that the actual vault does not have outside walls. There will be offices and a heritage walk around the vault to ensure that the climate within the vault remains constant. The decision to focus on the vault came after discussion about finances and the priorities of the project. The first priority is to create a repository that can house the archives, then to facilitate research and education. Without the repository, the other two can't happen. And one of the things is also to realize that congregations do want to know that there will be some parts of the archive that will be non-researchable. There'll be the private archive, and every congregation can make the decision about what can be researched and when it can be researched at some point. The timeline is dependent on several factors, the least of which is the supply chain and availability of workers. At this time, we're looking to share the design of the actual building with the partner congregation, and then to move forward with either a late winter or early spring construction date. In 2023, most likely a lead archivist will be hired along with the executive director. The aim of the project is to start acquiring the archives, the actual archives of the congregations in the spring or summer of 2024. As we are ending the initial acquisition phase, we will then move into what we are calling phase 2, which will be the renovation of one of the adjacent buildings to the exhibit into an exhibit space, and the Heritage Walk will be completed. This phase will be sometime in 2025 after a curator of exhibits is hired and the exhibit is researched. And I think it was Nadia that made the comment that the lead archivist and the curator are going to need to learn what's in the collection to be able to really create an exhibit. And so that'll take a little bit of time, but hopefully everything will be up and fully functioning with the transitional exhibits, or what I'm calling thematical exhibits, that will be a theme that each congregation will then have a part of the exhibit during 2026. How it is going to work is, this is still being worked out, but my thought is, and this is just a projection, is that the archive of a congregation will be transported to HARC, where it will be unloaded and then processed into the vault. And we have, one of the reasons we're phasing this is that the acquisition space will become the exhibit space after we get the majority of the the archive in, or the collection in. And each congregation has been asked to have the archive assessed, meaning that the boxes are at least numbered, and a list of the boxes and what the basic content is. Now, that's basic information that's essential. If they have more information, that's always better. And the congregational archivist or their representative would accompany the collection and oversee the actual transfer to HARC. The lead archivist and the HARC staff will then process the collection into the archive, the vault, and there will be a special congregational section. So each congregation will have a section of the vault that will be their collection. So there won't be a commingling of some of the major part of the archive. There may be a little bit of commingling with larger artifacts that take up different space. One of the needs that we're looking at is a content management software. I'm not as knowledgeable. I'm not an archivist. As you heard, I'm a liturgist, and I've just come into this archivist stuff a little late. But I'm learning through webinars and through the collaboration between some of the members of this panel to look into a system that can be shared, creating a network for users that can be accessed so that others can build on the information, and we can build a true collaborative archive of collaborative archives. This would also help researchers and also continue to demonstrate the collaborative nature of this project that, as many have said, began for us in a day in 2018 called the Day of Dreaming. That was a dream of a couple of St. Mary's Holy Cross sisters, and then continued through the Boston conference. HARC will have an archival staff that will be separate from the congregational archives, and the congregational archivists can always come and be a part and work with their archives until it is totally turned over to HARC. And we are building a place that will have room for visiting archivists, as well as having permanent archive offices. So the archive staff will, or at least it's also our projection that our dream to have an exhibit curator and the staff will work to preserve and research what's in the collection, and then also assist researchers and work with faculty of the colleges and universities to utilize the collection in their classes. There was a pilot project, or actually it was just a project between the Holy Cross Sisters and St. Mary's College a couple of years ago that was very successful in having college students use the archive for research. So we hope to take that and expand it with other colleges and universities, along with created transitional exhibits that will be housed in our exhibit space. All congregations will continue to produce archival documents at least until the last member dies. And so there will always be a yearly acquisition for new material from each congregation. We have a limited space, and so archive and artwork will be accepted using a criteria that is yet to be developed. We all know that we can't take every artifact. My archivist laughs at me because I was told I can't take the sled that our sisters used to go down the hill for recreation in the early 1900s. Yet we will have to be a conversation about what needs to be kept, because some things really do need to be kept. We also know that not every piece of artwork that every sister created or every artifact is worth keeping, but we know that some are essential. So those are the tough decisions that archivists make quite often, and we're just going to have to continue to have those conversations. We are currently working on the deed of gift, trust and care and preservation documents, as well as a disaster plan, preservation plan, and security policies. Since we are a grassroots startup organization, we are building on many levels. We will be looking at ongoing sustainability plans for fundraising. The congregations at this point that have agreed to be a part of this realize that they will be putting money up front for the construction of the vault, and then for an endowment. We're also going to be looking at grants and working with other congregations to do those granting. We realize that we are a front of the curve, and so we're taking it one step at a time. We're learning a lot, and we're learning from some of the mistakes, but also from some of the things that we've also done well. For some, we are running, and for others, we seem to be taking this like a stroll through the park. In talking with another member of the HARC board, we both said that the most important piece of wisdom is that we started with dreaming and built relationships with those who would join the collaborative, and took the wisdom shared in that building that day of dreaming to build the foundation of HARC. If possible, I would suggest to start out with a dream, then make that dream a reality. Together, it takes more time, but the outcome is a very good view and stronger reality. Thank you all very much. And like others have said, I'm willing to have a conversation either by email or phone and continue the dialogue, because I realize from my leadership experience that this is an issue that's very important to congregations, but it's just starting to percolate or to come to the forefront that it's important to keep our records, because when we keep our archives, we keep our values, our mission, and our charism alive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Ginger. All right, we're gonna move on to our final speaker. Malachi McCarthy is the Providence Archivist Emeritus for the Claretian Missionaries in the USA and Canada, province located in Chicago. He has advanced degrees in library science, Latin American history, and a PhD in U.S. history from Loyola University in Chicago. He's very active in the archival world. Malachi founded the Chicago Area Religious Archives Group in 2007, and in the same year launched a week-long workshop entitled Introductory Archival Workshop for Religious Communities, which was offered biannually from 2007 to 2016. He has held leadership positions in the Catholic Library Association and other professional organizations. And in 2017, he initiated planning for the Boston College Conference, Envisioning the Future of Catholic Religious Archives, a working conference held in July 2018, which we've heard of several times during this webinar today. The meeting led to the formation of archival resources for Catholic collections in February of 2020. He His primary interest has been the preservation of American Catholic materials and making them accessible to the wider community. Currently, he serves on the working group planning the Chicago Collaborative Archive Center, of which we're going to hear about right now. Okay, Malachy, take it away.
Here we go. Let me pull up the screen if I can. Like everybody else, I'm kind of like technically challenged, let's put it that way. So does everybody see? Everybody sees the screen, I presume. I want to thank ACWR for holding this meeting. It's very critical. And I think as the final speaker of this program, I think this whole idea of collaboration is blossoming not only on the point, from the point of view of religious communities, but from the point of view of people planning this. I've worked closely with the other partners here. As you can tell, we're all at different stages of life. We're the newest kid on the block, so to speak. We're still in the planning phase and trying to get this thing off the ground. But it's been we each come with a variety of talents, and people are willing to share, and I think that's critical. The other thing I want to mention is, if people are not aware, the Society of American Archivists Outlook September-October 2022 issue had a 2-page article on Catholic religious collaborative efforts, which would be HARC, the Women's Religious Archive Collaborative, and the Chicago Collaborative Archive Center. So you should all be aware of that and look at that, because that outlines the positive idea of doing a collaborative archive. The other thing I would like to note is that of the people in the group, I'm the one. We started a collaborative archive at the Claretians in 2008. So I have some experience with that, with the Sisters of the Cenacle of North America and the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago, and the Claretians all share a single space. And so I came with that background in pushing this collaborative idea. And finally, before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that 2 of our members of the working group who is working zealously on the Chicago Collaborative Archive Center are with us. One would be Holly Fiedler, who's really of the Franciscans in Denver, who's really managing the operation, and Sister Mary Navarre of the Grand Rapids Dominicans. So let's begin with the Chicago Collaborative Archive Center. Here you see a rendering. These are actually 2 buildings built in the early 1900s. They are critical pieces in the South Loop of Chicago. The building is directly a block from the Harold Washington Library. The big thing about Chicago, which I've always emphasized, is that it is a research center. Chicago is the home to the American Library Association, the Society of American Archivists, and also it is probably one of the most studied cities in the United States. Just to give you an idea, last year, for 2 years running now, there have been 10 books written within the calendar year on Chicago. And the Union League Club sponsors a competition to say who is the best book in Chicago. So there's a lot of resources around, so the Chicago Collaborative Archive would fit in perfectly with the research interests of the city and its academic institutions. Now, how did this begin? This really generated itself from the Boston College Conference, which Michael has so kindly acknowledged that I was the proponent of, but I think it was, again, to set up a fertile ground for us to begin to discuss what needed to be done. Now, it's interesting, I've heard from people in Australia and heard from people in England and Ireland, and they're just amazed at how far the United States has come in discussing this. And I think the fact that we can have this meeting today and talk about how it's progressing is amazing from the 2018 conference. And that's really due to the generosity of Boston College in subsidizing and making the conference available to all people. So in the fall of 2019, I approached Ward Miller, who's a good friend, who is the director of Preservation Chicago, to say, gee, Ward, we need a space in the city of Chicago, and ideally it could be a building that needs to be saved, to start a collaborative archive. Well, Ward immediately took me to these two buildings, and these look very, very nice, but if you go to them today, they have scaffolding around them to protect the terracotta from falling off. So you're looking at a vision, not the reality right now. So Ward looked at these two buildings, which is 202 and 220 South State Street. The one on your right is the Century Building, which is 16 stories. The one on the left is the Consumers Building, which is 22 stories. And he also showed us St. Adalbert's Church, which is in Pilsen, which has been landmarked by the city of Chicago, which is a great site. Both of these sites are within a 5-minute walk of the subway. And that's critical in our planning, is that we want to be able to have people come and participate and use these archives. No, here we go. Now, where am I? I have to go back here. Sorry about that. All right, so this is basically the site. You see, we are right on top of, if you've been to Chicago, the Bean is directly east of us. We're right near the lake. So we are perfectly suited for academic institutions. The South Loop has 20,000 students connected with it down in that area. That area is south of Madison Avenue and State Street. The downtown campus of DePaul University is across the street. Roosevelt University is probably about 2 or 3 blocks away. Columbia College, the Notre Dame University Chicago campus is again a 5-10 minute walk. And then within a mile of the downtown campuses of Loyola University and University of Chicago. So this is, you can see this, and you can see how we're positioned in the sense of the Archives of Special Collections at Columbia, the Art Institute, then the Pritzker Museum and Harold Washington Library, which is the main library of the Chicago Public Library System. The building is backs into what they call the Federal Complex. Now, the Federal Complex was built in the early 60s by Mies van der Rohe. And if you know the campus of the Illinois Institute of Technology and various buildings in Chicago, it's this black kind of like curtain. It's like a 5 or 6 building complex. And when Mies designed these buildings to go in, we back into the federal courthouse, it was designed from the point of view that the person on the ground would look up and see the old and the new. And these buildings were part of the entry, with the planned entryway into the Federal Center on Quincy Court, and they are located right downtown. Here's another view of where we are. So you see we're about 3 blocks from the Art Institute. The public transportation, all public transportation is at our front door. All right. The next thing about a collaborative archive I'd like to mention, actually, since I come from the experience of participating in a collaborative archive, the ideal thing about collaborative archives is the efficient and managed use of the archival staff, which fosters interaction. We have, as I said, we have 3 archival groups, and we all share issues and difficulties and challenges. You don't have to build everything from scratch. The Chicago Collaborative Archive, the Collaborative Center, which we created, We have a shared research room, shared exhibit area. We share the copying. And then we have a stack area for the Claretians and the Senecal, and the separate area for the Episcopal Church, which came in later. The other thing about collaborative archives, you can eliminate duplicates from your collections. We provided a climate-controlled storage space. That was not in the initial plans, but when the Episcopals came in, we added that in. And I think the real key thing is really the interaction of doing a collaborative archive. So what we ended up doing is in the, shortly after I met with Ward, we started a working group, which we identified various partners, and I mentioned two of them, Holly Fiedler of the Franciscans and Mary Navarre of the Grand Rapids Dominicans. We got Dominican University involved with Christopher Allison, the director of the McGreal Center, and the person who has championed us through this whole thing and who's our real biggest cheerleader is Ward Miller, who's the executive director of Preservation Chicago. And our goal then, and this is before this project took off, was really to identify partners, look at possible tenants, and see what we wanted to do with the area. As you can see, this is the realistic picture of what it is now. It is a very, very large building. Critical to our vision was the participation of Dominican University, because Dominican University has a library school, and they are exploring the whole idea of setting up a program for training religious archivists. This is critical because it could be a gold mine not only for this center by training people who are attuned to the needs of religious archives, but also have a readily available site where Dominican University could have a space within these buildings to train their library science students, and it's much more central than the campus in River Forest. I think the biggest difficulties we have had with the Chicago Collaborative Archive Center is access to these buildings. You can see these two buildings back right into the federal office building, which is that black mass in back of the buildings. And then you can see the Sears Tower hovering above the structure. Because of 9/11, these buildings were bought. They were supposed to be rehabbed for the purposes of federal use. That never occurred. So they have been vacant for 17 years, which is really problematic. Because of the security site, the GSA has not let us examine this. So of all the projects that have been mentioned so far, we're still at the starting block, so to speak. We haven't begun the race yet, because we have to find out the possibilities that occur that can be available in these buildings. We know that they are very structurally sound. They have terracotta siding, which is going to be critical, and there's a lot of money in the city of Chicago to restore those buildings. This is a schematic, and you get an idea. And this is, we have been very fortunate to have KLM Architects and Thornton Tomasetti Structural Engineers to offer a time pro bono to look at the buildings. And the more they look at the buildings, the more excited they are that these are a perfect solution to save these two historic buildings for archives, because archives, the back half of the buildings, which are of great concern to the federal government, so that people don't have readily access to attack the courthouses, would be sealed off for stack area. So this is very, very critical. The buildings, as you see, these are the one on the left is the Consumers Building. We're talking about 7,100 square feet versus the Century Building on the right, which is 3,300 square feet. When you're talking about these buildings, you're really talking probably only 6,000 square feet per floor, which isn't a lot. The Chicago Collaborative Archive, where the Claretians are housed, is 5,500 square feet. So although the buildings look imposing, I think the floor space is kind of limited. What we ended up doing is in December 10th in 2021, we hosted an open meeting for people who were interested in participating and exploring the possibility of becoming part of a Chicago Collaborative Archive Center. And immediately 2 groups came to the fore. That would be the Franciscan Central Archive, which Holly is involved with, Holly Fiedler, and also what they call the OFM USA 6, which is a merger of the men's Franciscan communities from New York, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Burlington, Wisconsin, Albuquerque, and Santa Barbara. So that is the partners who are involved in this, and they're actively discussing this. One of the big principles that we made early on is, instead of us kind of trying to communicate what people are saying at our community meetings, if people are interested in being part of this, we want them to be involved within the process with the architects and structural engineers. As I say, we've been very fortunate to have Meg Kinland of JLK Architects and representatives from Thornton Tomasetti structural engineers that both have worked on these buildings. The other fortunate thing we had was in March 2022, and this is where Chicago is unique. Chicago is a great historic center for architecture. And if you've been to the city, the best thing to go on is the Chicago Architectural Tour run by the run on the river. And so therefore there was great interest in these buildings. And Preservation Chicago decided in March 2022 to list this building as the endangered buildings in Chicago. And they do about a 90-page booklet. There was a press conference. And a few months later, they were followed by Landmarks Illinois that highlighted the importance of these buildings. On July 7th, we participated, the working group of the Chicago Collaborative Archives participated in front of the City of Chicago Commission on Chicago Landmarks. And they were dutifully impressed. And they are very interested in seeing these buildings landmarked. Now, this is where you have a battle between the city versus the federal government, because the federal government, in the meantime, passed a bill to demolish the buildings with the $53 million appropriation. And that is why this endangered series came up very, very quickly. I think now we are working with the federal government to try and find an amicable situation where we can continue with this project and be able to make this Chicago Collaborative Archives a reality. One of the things that occurred because of this decision to demolish the buildings, there was an immediate outcry by the Chicago press, and there's probably been about 20 or 30 articles in various print media and on TV about these buildings. We have been fortunate to do a change.org petition to save the buildings from an architectural point of view, and that has generated 23,000 signatures. But unknown to us, and Ward worked with this group called B1M video presentation, he gave a presentation, and they have developed a 10-minute video on this project, which has now garnered 1 million viewers. And that's B1M is out of London. So that has generated a lot of interest. So we are moving along, so to speak. I would say this, it's gaining tremendous momentum. Now, you're going to ask what has occurred with the federal government. We met on September 12th with the federal government to have an initial meeting to preserve these buildings. It was a friendly meeting. There was a lot of discussion. The preservationists shot back at the whole idea of demolishing the buildings. And we are scheduled to have a meeting next Tuesday again to follow up. So there is a lot of discussion to save these buildings. In other words, when I said we're still at the starting block, we have to get into these buildings to see how suitable they are. We're fortunate because JLK Architects and Thornton Tomasetti, they know these buildings. So we hopefully can get an idea of what's going to happen. The other thing, obviously, is if we do not demolish the buildings, we would want the federal government to take part of that $53 million appropriation to renovate these buildings, because they have been vacant for 17 years. And it's due to their neglect, really, that the terracotta and different aspects of the buildings have failed. So therefore, that would be part of our discussion as we move forward. And as things get a little more dicey, that's going to be what we're going to speak to the federal government about. So that is, to a certain degree, where we're at with the buildings. I think the other thing that, if you notice in this architectural drawing, there is a center building. And what we would like, what we envision in this whole center is to create a auditorium and an exhibit area for this building. Unlike the other programs that have been mentioned, the Chicago Collaborative Archives Center is open to all archives, not just religious archives. So that's one big difference. It would be kind of a condo arrangement in the sense people would buy space. The big thing I would say that distinguishes collaborative archives from academic archives is that the community owns the collection, and then as the community comes to completion, then that is turned over to the board. So there is the integrity of the collection is always going to be first priority on the point of view of the boards of these groups. Now, we have applied for nonprofit status in the state of Illinois, which is pretty much an easy process. And once we get that, we'll move to 501c3 in the Catholic Directory. And we will be seeking both Ginger's and Susan's advice on that process. And that's what is so beautiful about this group, is that we all share, we all have different kind of areas of concern, but we all are willing to discuss how to help one another. So I think the difference with this, with the other projects, if this goes, this is going to be a game changer, because this will become an archive center. We envision that within this building, we would have a floor for oversized storage with a separate curator. We could have a digital area. We would want to do a cloud for all the participants for digital storage. As you mentioned, as people have mentioned before, to do a shared website that people can go to one website and see the different collections. That you would have a archival content management system that could be shared. So the big thing is because of the location and because of the center of Chicago, if this comes to fruition, it will be really kind of a game changer, because it will be a center which is readily available to scholars, that people can come to Chicago, go into the building, and it's, you know, gain what they want to see and have a profitable experience. So thank you very much. I don't have my email posted, but I'm still with the Claretian email, so it's mccarthy@claretians.org, and we can I can point you to the right direction. As I say, Holly Fiedler is doing most of the work for this project. I'm the kind of the front person, the public relations person, but she could be of great help. But thanks again.
Thank you, Malachy. Great. So we have a handful of questions. I'm going to start there first, and we've got a decent amount of time. So if you have a question, you can either put it into the chat or you can raise your hand and we'll hope to get to you. We have several pages of galleries here, so I will do my best to find you. Okay, we had a couple questions come in related to sustainability. And again, we appreciate that every project is at different stages of actualization. So whether this is actual for you or it's an idea, or maybe it's an idea that you've had for other projects or you've seen other projects bring it to fruition, I think we could probably all comment on this, but there's some questions around sustainability over time. So the initiatives, how are they going to steward, preserve, process, make accessible? And funding, of course, is the underlying question around all of that. So if you could each maybe speak to that related to your particular project, that would be great.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, we can just run through. That sounds good. Yep.
So Boston College is blessed with a great deal of money. It has the second largest endowment of a Catholic university in the country. Their fundraising is superb. They took in $315 million in gifts in the fiscal year that ended June 1st. Fiscal years in New England often end at the end of May. The Board of Trustees are committed to the Catholic Archives project, just as they're committed to the nursing school, the law school, any other program in the university. So I have no concern or fear about the financial future of this program. The Catholic Archives building will be built at whatever cost. The architects say it has to be, we're hoping it's not more than $50 or so million, but it will be built and the program will be sustained. Every time I've asked Father Leahy for any money, he's been very forthcoming. He's just said that the principle of the Boston College program must be that no congregation will be charged for depositing or maintaining here. He himself and all of his family for several generations were educated by the Cincinnati Mound Dominicans. He had relatives in that congregation. He's a Wisconsin Jesuit. Many Wisconsin Jesuits went to school to that community and other communities in the Milwaukee and Omaha area. So he's very familiar with the situation of the congregations of women religious, particularly who frankly have no money. And so here at Boston College, we have no concern about the financial part of it.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And just a follow-up around that, does that commitment also include professional staffing to meet the needs of the collections coming in?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, Nadia, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So, for us as an academic library, our funding, we have a dedicated funding stream that comes in from the university. So that helps in a lot of ways. And, I think one thing that we'll look to, for the future is that I think that continuing these collaborations could be a full-time job by itself, but also having, you know, a specific archivist who's, you know, assigned to that area, specifically for the women religious archival collections would be incredibly beneficial. You know, one other thing that contributes to our longevity in archives and special collections is the fact that we contribute to the teaching and research mission of the university. And so one statistic that I didn't report on in my presentation is that we host about 40 to 45 class visits per academic year. So these are faculty who are bringing undergraduates to the archives to, and we're working together to incorporate, you know, on the one hand to introduce undergrads to these materials, but also where there are opportunities to do so to also incorporate these primary sources into their research projects. So we, you know, as far as I know, the university is fairly financially stable. Like Boston College, they're, you know, working on an endowment. Our current goal, which they're in the final phases of the capital campaign for, is to achieve a $1 billion endowment. And so that will help support, you know, the university overall. And we also have, through our graduate program in pastoral ministries, a funded program that's centered in particular on women in theology. And there's the, oh my gosh, I've just completely blanked on his head. The Marquee speaker series, which invites 2 to 3 women per year to come and speak on that topic. And so we have potential to, you know, also connect with graduate students who may be interested in religious life or women's spirituality and things of that nature. So I'm fairly confident, at least for the foreseeable future, that, you know, we have pretty solid financial sustainability. But if we're going to increase our, you know, collaborations or provide more support, you know, such as the digital collection support or other things, we'll definitely need at least one. I mean, we could use as many staff as we could possibly get, but in the short term, you know, I'm hopeful that we will be able to, you know, fundraise or advocate for, you know, a full-time dedicated position to take over this area.
As I said, we're still building our models for that, but I do believe that as part of our capital campaign, not only are we doing the bricks and mortar, but the endowment piece. And I think that also at the end, I know I appreciate the generosity of Boston College and knowing that the congregations are on a short string in terms of what their resources are. But at the end, if congregations do have something, I think that's a part of our responsibility as women religious, that, you know, we want to protect these in perpetuity. So whatever kind of a gift we can make at the end. And then I think the proper management of an endowment will be critical to that. And also as part of this collaborative, I think that's a part of the larger conversation is, do we maybe look at a larger pot together that really helps to support all religious congregations and these endowments in perpetuity, because it really is, it's critical to us. And as far as the protection of the collections themselves, it has been said by others previous to this, that we would hope that the archivists that are working with the current collections would work with the staff at the Archive Collaborative, that the staff members, the interns, could get to intimately know what is important about a collection and the nuances of a collection for as long as possible, until there are no members left to be able to do that, so that the institutional memory of a collection can continue to be passed on. And that's why we're also building relationships with our preservation institutions at Kent State and at Ursuline College in terms of getting interns that are really interested in working with these collections and getting this younger generation interested in this.
Great, thank you. Sister Ginger?
Yeah, so as Susan just said, we're still continuing to do that, figuring out how that's all going to be. But one of the things that we have asked is the congregations are making a donation, not only to the construction of the vault, but also to an endowment fund for that sustainability. But we know that that's going to be part of it. So it's also going to be part of the communication plan and fundraising. So we're just kind of trying to work on that and make it the best that we can. and also working collaboratively so that we can try to keep some of the expenses down when it comes to things that we can, like networking our content management, preservation, and those kinds of things, if we can do that together. So we're just kind of looking at different options, but the congregations are asked to make an endowment, a contribution to the endowment.
Great, thank you, Sister Ginger. Maliki, I know this is more future state for you, but would you like to jump in and comment?
I think that the key thing is, I think Sister Susan is really onto something in the sense that she hasn't really, we've talked privately about, is there really has to be a program, and as I say, it's, as she says, the larger pot, where this issue is brought to the fore of the American public. And I have advocated that there has to be a national statement that all Catholic learned societies sign on to and support. And the fact that the other thing is there has to be a kind of a percentage of the endowment that is designated just for archives. I think the critical thing I see with the sustainability is really the commitment of the community initially to do that, and then the board will take over as the fundraising piece as the communities face completion and start raising money in that regard. The goal of this whole thing is really to get good scholarship. And I think the more that people produce books that inform the story of the United States and its religious contributions, the better off we'll be. But sustainability is the critical question. Now, with the Chicago project, we hope to get, if the buildings are not demolished, part of that money will come to sustain those buildings, in the sense to do the structural and the renovation that is absolutely needed to bring them back to the state that they were taken over 17 years ago, which they have been neglected. So that's all I have to say. But sustainability is a critical question, and I think as the small group of people who are doing collaborations and academic libraries talk, then we will foster ideas to really look at things from a homogeneous point of view, not just our specific point of view.
Great, thank you. Another grouping of questions that have come in are in regards to, from your perspective, how or in what way should collections be readied to be received? And one of the specific questions was, will you require a certain level of processing, or what do you hope ideal state, or what will you be willing to receive and be able to offer a little bit of love later on with filling in the gaps with resources and staffing? But what is sort of a bare minimum criteria in order to receive a collection? What do the archivists need to be doing to get ready?
We ask congregations to process the collections according to standard archival procedures. Some collections have been very, very well done. The Ursulines of the Roman Union of the Central Province, unbelievable. Others, pretty well done, but some congregations, as was said earlier, do not have and have not had historically professional archivists working in them. So actually, here at Boston College, truth be told, we don't care. We will take them in whatever shape they're in. We don't expect the community to spend money to go out and get professional people to come in and prepare materials to standard procedures. But so far, almost all the collections have been either very well done, as I said, the Ursulines are, or quite well done, as most of the others are. So that's where it is with us. We expect shortly to have a large staff of archivists and processors here who will take care of it, putting it in standard procedure and putting it online so it's available to everyone.
Yeah, and for us at Santa Clara, to some extent, the kind of shelving we have dictates at least the containers that materials go in. So, for example, with the Sisters of the Holy Family, they had most of their collections were in hanging files and lateral filing cabinets, and we needed to get those into for the majority of the collection, they're in archival record cartons. And then we worked with a third-party company called History Associates to actually contract out the enhanced description of their collections. They had done a really great job of getting their collections organized and doing some basic description, but we needed to once we transferred everything from the lateral files into archival containers, needed to fine tune some of that description. I've been working as a different example with Sister Sharon Casey of the Tacoma Dominicans and Associates. She and I have been meeting about every 2 months for about the last 2 years or so. And she has been really trying to collect all of the archival material and get it one place and rehouse it and deduplicate and, weed out duplicate material that isn't needed. And I actually went a couple of months ago up to Tacoma to visit with her and really kind of physically and visually survey all of the collections, and we'll continue to consult as time goes on. So in terms of basic descriptive, the bare minimum that I hope that we can achieve with Sister Sharon and with other collections is having the minimum descriptive elements that are recommended in DACS, which is Describing Archives and Content Standard. So they have criteria for what the minimum level, so that's things like a collection, title and some kind of call number, record, collection ID, et cetera. So at the very least, we would love to see that. And then any other enhanced descriptive elements like scope and contents notes or, biographical or historical sketches that are feasible is really, really helpful. And I think the other bit of advice I would offer is, in as much as you can articulate what the main groupings of records and then series or sub-series that go with that, if you can articulate some kind of, structure or outline to the collections, that's particularly helpful as well. Really for our approach, we try to adapt to either what currently exists or whatever is feasible with the staffing that any individual congregation may have. And the last thing I'll say is that for many of you who are archivists or maybe have attended training, archival description is iterative. So you might start at one level and go a little bit deeper at a later point in time. So, it's not this thing that happens and then you're done. It's an ongoing sort of a practice. And to some extent, that's also informed by your users and what they're interested in. So, we really try to look at that holistically, but as I said, try to meet, any individual congregation at whatever point they're at and work from there.
I would agree with Nadia on meeting every congregation where they are. That's why Ellen Pierce has been talking to the archivists for most of our partners. She's been familiar with some of their collections and has gone to visit them or has done something via Zoom with them. We're going to continue that process where we are actually in the space and communicating with them and also kind of working with archival teams. We have one situation where we needed to get a total archive out of a building that was getting ready to sell. And so we created a SWAT team to go in and to, at minimum, just figure out a basic finding aid to know what was in each box and to have that on a Microsoft Word list. So we're willing to take something like that. That collection right now is in temperature controlled storage until it can be moved into the building, our new building. But for us, it's trying to assess where each collection is at. Everybody's at a different level, just so that we have an understanding of what is there. at the basic level is fine. Some people are a little bit further down the road with that. And I think that that's kind of helpful. But the one thing that we've been in conversation with ACWR is how do we plug into the expertise there so that archivists in your world and in your universe might be able to be a part of these teams in the future that we can fund in some way through a larger grant to go and help congregations that really have no one, to really do a good assessment and to help to get a collection to wherever it needs to go, and that we really support one another in these efforts with the correct expertise.
I would just second that. I think we're working with congregations where they're at. We do have a good, better, best kind of thing where good is like you have it in boxes, then you have the files on a basic content list and say, in box 1 is the president's reports from 1929 to 1948, you know, something like that, to this is an archival box and it contains blah, 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 blah. So we're trying to be as open as we can, but helping to understand. But a basic thing is a box number and what's it kind of in that box so that we can at least go from there and make sure that we get all the boxes from point A to point B into the, and then processed. And then if they have content and have a content list and description and all that, that's great. But so we just kind of did the good, better, best type of outline.
I think this is the bugaboo I have in this whole process, is the fact that people do not know how to get their collections organized. And I've been struggling with this to have ARCs do a program on this under the repository committee, because it's critical in order to understand the collection to have some sense of what the collection is. I think that people cannot get around the fact that you're going to have at some point a professional archivist involved who's going to make sense of the collection and get it ready to move. The difficulty is if you do not do the weeding before you give it to the archives, then you're having a group of people who don't have a sensitivity to the charism-based nature of the religious community, what is important to them, and how is that supposed to be saved and how is it relevant. You know, running an archive is like baking a cake. You have a whole shelf of these spices and ingredients, and you have to take each one. And it's not rocket science. It's a very easy process, but it's tedious. And that's the critical thing. And we have to develop ways in order to simplify what is priorities. You know, and I've struggled with this setting up the Claretian archives. And really the priorities that assist you in understanding your archives is your community publications, because that is going to give you a timeline as to what were the major issues in your community, who were the players, who are the dissenters? I mean, we always have to look at dissent as well as positive. You know, religious communities live salvation history to the fullest. You have heroes and you have sinners. You know what I mean? And that is a critical thing to understand. And that's why I think the more you can have the community do the legwork with assistance of a professional, the better off you will, because the community is going to come to you with at least an understanding of what is there. Now, the Claretians have a building downtown in Chicago that has empty floors, and the Franciscan men are looking at taking one of our top floors just to create an interim archives. And that might be the way for communities who are totally flummoxed to be able to go to a space, be near an archive, hire an archivist, assign a couple of members to work with the community, and really start doing basic processing. We're not going to get to the nitty-gritty of like who's in every photo, but at least we'll have an idea of how to structure the collection. But this is the critical issue now. And leadership is really kind of in a state where they're throwing their hands up because that's going to be a lot of expense. And it is a lot of expense, but it's going to cut down, in a sense, it's going to ease the transition and it's going to give you a collection that's understandable. So I would really recommend leadership consider seriously about what is their plan to really begin to reorganize these collections for movement. Because otherwise you can send a bunch of junk, that's not relevant. Just so you know, for those who are non-archivists, only less than 10, probably about 7% of your collection gets saved of everything you produce. So you're not talking a lot of stuff, but it's like cleaning out your closets in the spring. You have to do that, and that's a critical nature. But you have to understand who you are, and that's why it's critical for a religious who knows the charism to be part of that discussion. That's my harangue for today.
Okay. We have a hand from Mary Grace. We're going to go ahead and jump to her question first, and then we'll go back to that. So, Mary Grace.
Thanks, Lisa. It's not actually a question, it's a comment. And I'm not speaking as a rocket scientist, Malachy. I'm just speaking as an archivist. I just want to really emphasize that you absolutely cannot cut costs in two areas. One is the archival vault. It has to be a really good archival vault. The second area is staffing. You have to have adequate staffing. And as some of you have mentioned, and you need some professional staff. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mary Grace. I was just going to get to your vault question or your comments. So thanks for jumping in. We also had a series of questions, big surprise, regarding access. So curious to know how far along in your planning or futuring around policies of access, specifically as something gets transferred, if things are still considered active files, will the congregation continue to have access to those files? And how will that work and how will that actually look?
At Boston College, yes, the congregations will have access to the files, and they will also be the ones who decide what is closed and for how long. Boston College is the only Catholic university in the United States with a strictly research library. One of the libraries here, the John J. Burns Library, is strictly research. Nothing circulates. It's books and documents and collections, primarily of politicians, members of Congress, former members of Congress like Tip O'Neill, people like that. So there's a longstanding policy here of how to maintain collections, who has access, and we've told every congregation of women religious that they will have a prior access to anyone else. There will be no collection surfing. This is an era we live in, unfortunately, in which some people want to surf through collections looking for scandal. The Burns Library has screened those people out for more than 20 years. And we will certainly also do that in the Boston College Catholic Religious Archives repository. That's an important question and something we all have to be very aware of.
Yeah, so for us at Santa Clara internally, our own sort of standard kind of records embargoes are usually, I think, 20 years from the date of their transfer. And then after that, it just kind of depends on the type of material. Some materials are governed by state or federal laws. So student records, for example, with grade transcripts and other stuff are considered confidential. I believe until the person passes away is when their privacy ends. For Sisters of the Holy Family, they wanted to make their congregation archives as accessible as possible. So before transfer, they went through the archives and weeded out. And I think their primary focus was on some of the sister files that had, expired driver's licenses, and maybe passports. One sister was arrested for protesting, in the vein of social justice activities. And so, there's some things that they went through and did some screening and as far as I know, they really were very much involved in that process before the materials were transferred. The only other example that I can point to where, my conversations have centered on any kinds of restrictions would include our sister hermit, who has some of her spiritual journals and writings that she wishes to have embargoed for a period of 25 years after she passes. So we'll, when her archives is still with her in Maine, but when the collection does finally come to us, that's the only restriction that she has requested that we apply to her collections, but otherwise her materials will be accessible. And so, we continue, and for the future congregations, we'll continue to have those conversations about, what should be restricted for a period of time when it doesn't fall under some of the standard things that we know need to be restricted. And then also just to answer the question, so we field the requests for information from the congregations just as we would any other reference request. So Sister Michaela, who was the congregation historian, we hear from her periodically. I'm looking for, such and such of a photograph. And the great thing is she knows the collection so well, and we really didn't change most of the overall organization. And so she'll say, I think it's in the such and such series and Sister so-and-so's file, and that really helps us a whole lot to field those. But we usually have, when they're kind of straightforward requests and we're fully staffed, we can usually fulfill those, within about 5 business days or so. So we try to, turn those around as quickly as possible. And then, the other thing that we're focused on where there aren't any privacy or other concerns is making materials available digitally. So we currently have the congregation newsletters out with a vendor right now to digitize those. And that is a great way to, someone else on the call observed, those publications and things that were pushed out for sort of public consumption, highlight important milestones or show the evolution of, different ministries over time. And that's one of those really easy things that we can make accessible and kind of increase access, to almost right away. In that particular case. So we try as much as we can and where it's appropriate to do so to make that, make portions of the collection self-serve. And there's a lot we can do with what's called optical character recognition to take these, typescripts, digitize them. The machines can recognize the letters on the page and then make that content full text searchable. So it really lessens the burden on us. To have to do the physical searching, and especially when those publications don't have the benefit of indexes, that those digitization projects can be incredibly helpful for increasing access, and especially outside of our business hours, which are limited.
I guess I'd have to just kind of ditto what Michael and Nadia both said. It really, as a former leader, I know how important it is for congregations to continue to have access to their collections. And so, that is paramount to us, that a congregation really in these gifting agreements feels very comfortable in making their decisions about their records and what is important to them, personnel records, corporate minutes. Things that we need to be aware of is if something is subpoenaed and how is that process going to look? Because that is our reality today. So I think congregations need to feel comfortable with that. But I also think that, they can determine how long does something ever get seen? How are we going to vet researchers coming in to look at things? All of the policies and procedures, those are all things that we're going to be working with the congregations on, as well as with those legal gifting agreements. I think it's very important for the congregations to be able to feel that they are still in some sort of control and controlling how their collection is being used, and has significant trust in the staff and in the policies and procedures.
Great, thank you, Sister Susan. Those have all been very comprehensive answers. We do have a hand up, so Maliki or Sister Ginger, do either of you have anything else to add?
No, I was just going to say for time, I will just, what the people have said is what we're doing as well. So not.
Okay, thank you.
I think my whole thing is that people should be aware of the moral records policy of the Archdiocese of Chicago. And you should never keep psychological or medical records in your collections. The other thing, which is critical for men's communities, such as the Claretians, is once you have litigation against you, you cannot destroy anything in those personnel files. And those are located in our archives, but they're off limits to people. So it's really a sticky wicket, to say the least, to decide how you're going to manage those files and where those files are going to move. Because I will give an example with the Episcopals. They went through all their files looking for evidence of sexual abuse. They had lay staff go through that. There's no protection for that lay staff. The lay staff could be subpoenaed. If you're going to go through a whole series of personnel records to figure out what's there, you have to have lawyers, because that's under attorney-client privilege. So these are not easy answers. So you really need to know what you're getting, because the last thing an archivist wants to be is the mediator to decide what is being turned over. That is not their role. That's not their pay scale. So that is critical. So this is not something that is an easy thing to do, but you can start by saying we will not collect psychological or medical records and get rid of them immediately, and because they're dated anyway. But that's all 2 cents.
Thanks, Maliki. Holly, thank you so much. You've been so patient. Go ahead.
Thank you. I would just say that I'm pushing back on the concept of taking collections that don't have any record of intellectual control. It's important for a community to define their collections in context with whoever is remaining present there before moving them. And so I push that there's ways to find assistance to help through this process, whether it's even grant funding or voluntary efforts, but it is vital to try and gain understanding of a collection with the sisters in that moment before you move them, and as much as you can before you move them, to even get the very basic intellectual control, because it directly affects restrictions and access. It directly affects how efficiently you can respond to reference requests. So I think it's vital to do as much as you can before they move. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly, very much for that. I concur as an archivist. We have a comment from Sister Maria Jasmine, who has been inspired by this particular webinar today, and says she's going to go on and seek a degree. I'm sure not all in part to this webinar, but she said that she was very much inspired by and that today's discussion was a game changer. So we're very happy to hear and very encouraged. We need more people at the table. And I want to keep and honor our time. We've asked a lot from all of you, so we're going to wrap this up. So as the incoming president of ACWR, I want to thank you all. We have a lot of challenging times ahead of us, but I'm so encouraged and hopeful by all these voices at this table. I hope the next few webinars will continue to morph into case study discussions so we can discuss the pitfalls, the landmines, and then our successes as we go through this journey together. So thank you all, especially to the presenters, for taking up this incredibly challenging project, and for taking on the tentacles of inspiration that came out of the Boston and earlier conferences. So thank you all for being here today, and we're here because of you. And look forward to our next webinar series. We're hoping to have one more before the end of the year. And we are in the early stages of planning the Tricentennial Conference. It will be in St. Louis in 2024. So look for more emails and communication about that. So thank you all and have a blessed day.